This program has been made possible by Weatherby Asset Management. The views and opinions expressed are those of the guest.
This is Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. I'm Emily Bouchard, your host today, and I'm here with Dr. Tom Deans, author of Willing Wisdom. And we are talking about what is it that keeps people from having wills, how to go about having a will. And in this segment, I want to talk about what is this about consumption? You brought it up a couple different times. Your family obviously transferred some really important values, and I want you to talk about what values you saw transferred and how your parents did this in terms of working for money and doing really good things with the money that you're given. Obviously, there was a sense of, oh, wealth is going to be transferred, and I know when. And you have a very grounded, intentional way of moving in terms of consumption. So I'd like you to speak about that.
Well, Emily, let's go back to where we started in those family meetings, where I'm learning, as with my brother, about the magnitude of our family's wealth. And we learn, very early on, there's people who are, fantastically wealthy, certainly more wealthy than our family, and lots that are less wealthy. There is a kind of a context about what has been created in the family. But what's also really being taught is that we have this wealth, and yet my father and grandfather are working. And so at a young age we're thinking, well, why are you working? I mean, you don't need to. And so at an early age that seed is planted about the nature of work. It is not just to create wealth for consumption. There is something intrinsically purposeful and satisfying about working. I've met lots of billionaires on the speaker circuit. They're working. They don't have to. There is something about the creative genius that leads us to get up in the morning and add something, to build something, to invent something. And that's what people who master wealth get from an early age from their parents. That is the gift. It's not the money. It's the idea behind the money and the nature and the essence of work. And so that's what family meetings do. And I have to be very clear, some of the best family meetings subsequent to those early ones that I attended have taken place on the back deck, on the dock at the cottage, around a campfire, where families speak with equanimity around, as partners, about what it is and how things will transition and what can be accomplished with wealth beyond buying another house, another car, another plane. In a really interesting way, what we've learned in our family is that when we can kind of die without hanging on to things, in other words, the more we've relinquished prior to our death, it almost appears that we have an easier, kinder, gentler death. In other words, to master life is almost an essential requirement to master death. And those who have awful, torturous, wretched deaths are gripping onto their stuff, thinking that the things that gave them satisfaction in the temporal world are the things that are going to give them peace of mind as they're dying. And it's not so. It's simply not. And so talk to anyone in palliative care, anyone who's providing late in life care. It's those people who come to terms with how they're going to transition, not just their stuff, but their ideas. And they have magnificent last chapters of their lives. It's inspiring.
Yeah. And I like how you speak about knowing that you have the capacity to make a purchase and have it be something, but choosing not to live from a place of excess, or if there is something that's more luxurious that you want to have, really demonstrating what it's like to plan for it, save for it, do the research, maybe involve the kids in it, look at the time frame around it, so that the kids are seeing that, yeah, we have the capacity to buy anything we want whenever we want, and there's also something to be said for being smart about the purchases you make and being deliberate and not being impulsive. And I think that that's something else that was a value that got transferred from your parents, it seems.
No question. I think there's also something in us, and it's hard to describe, but I certainly feel it. This sense of obligation for leaving an amount of money that is larger than was left for me. It's a little bit of a game. It's a little bit of a kind of a competition. Like, I'll show you, Dad, that I can create more wealth than for my children. And going backwards through the generation, I feel like this has been alive in our family. That it's this kind of understanding that when we receive a gift, we have children, and that wealth is going to be divided. So if you do the simple math and you look at a founder, maybe a little depictive here, but if you have a founder and he has 2 children and they have 2 children and they have 2 children, if all we're gifting is money, the money will be consumed. In other words, someone has to take that gifted money and risk something of themselves to create new wealth, or else the growth in progeny will outstrip the growth in the money that's been gifted. It won't last.
What I like about what you said is because you come from a family of business starters, developers, founders, is the cutting the teeth in the businesses where the people in the family, part of the transition of that wealth was transitioning the wisdom and the knowledge of what makes for a successful business. How do you make sound decisions? How do you make grounded risks as opposed to more foolish risks in terms of, hey, this seems like a nice scheme, or that person seems like they're trustworthy. It's like, no, there are really good principles that you can use and apply that we've applied as a family over generations that have made a big difference in terms of how we are successful, how you can be successful and grow it. And I like how you said competition, but I think what I find is really energizing for the people that we work with is the sense of, wow, I've been given this remarkable gift in terms of what somebody else has used their industry to create. And how do I bring my gifts to it? How do I bring my talents and my abilities to then honor that gift, not just steward it and keep it safely protected and tight and use it a little piecemeal, but how do I take calculated risks with that transfer of the knowledge of how to do this? And if I haven't gotten that, perhaps that money's been generational, how do I go about surrounding myself with key mentors and great role models and take the courses that were going to show me on how to be effective? And, one of the things we get a lot is people who don't have these conversations, it's like they're born into it, and their parents may have a language in terms of what it means to have come into it, but they haven't transferred that to their kids. And then the kids are supposed to already know how to speak that language. Jamie often talks about it, like if your parents came from France and they speak French fluently, but when they raised you in the States or in Canada, they only spoke, and Canada, that would be really good analogy, they only spoke English, and they never taught you how to speak French, you're going to be at such a disadvantage when suddenly you are given a tremendous amount of resources that require you to speak French. And that's the finances, money, wealth, business, that's a language. It's a language that can be learned, and understanding how to have that is hugely important. And I often start off with an inheritor that I'm working with in terms of using personal finance for dummies. Not because they're dummies, but because let's start with the basics and make sure you have a really good grounded understanding that anybody can start from, and they don't have to feel ashamed about what they do know or don't know. And it sounds like you've had that from the time you were 5. Like, this is what you need to be aware of, this is what you need to understand.
You're absolutely correct. And I have Estate Planning for Dummies on my desk. I could reach for it. I absolutely agree. I love that book. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's a whole kind of guild, a subworld with its own language, estate planning, and I think it intimidates, and I think it's a real barrier. So the great advisors are able to kind of invite people into the process and make them feel like that they have something to learn and something to contribute. They can teach us so much. I want to pick up on a point that you made, and I really believe that the most important, interesting parts of biographies of the great political and commercial leaders and industrialists in the history of civilization. I always like those early chapters where you're reading about family, like the family conditions and the parents that gave rise to this kid called Lincoln, who came up with this audacious idea that went on to become so impressive. Like, how did that happen? That's the chapter that I want to read, that he has gone on and done this and accomplished so much. The musicians, the artists, the Salvador Dali's, what gave rise to these geniuses? Because it's from our family that we receive our greatest gifts. And in most of those cases, it certainly wasn't money. It was something far more profound and valuable.
Yeah. Well, in our next segment, we're going to be talking more about that.
Weatherby Asset Management is dedicated to providing exceptional wealth management services by forming partnerships built on trust, understanding and thoughtful advice. For more than 20 years, they've been offering objective perspective, personalized planning, and sophisticated investment management to individual investors and families, as well as pension plans, foundations, and endowments. Contact them at www.weatherby.com. Weatherby Asset Management, located in San Francisco and New York City.